Hello everyone. Today I am going to be briefly discussing Ben-Hur. I put this film in the classic category because I feel a lot of people regard this film as to be a very memorable film, and that it focuses on a lot of different things, and it is again one of these older films, I believe made in 1959, so again you're going to kind of get that sort of classic sort of feel with this movie, especially considering the fact it's almost 4 hours long. So again, it is an old classic movie in that it goes on and on, but then it ends. But basically, in case anybody doesn't know what Ben-Hur is about, well, Ben-Hur is about none other than Ben-Hur, or at least one of the Ben-Hurs, because the main character, Judah's last name is Ben-Hur, and hence we get the title of the film, and our main character played by Charles Heston. And the movie mainly focuses on him and sort of his struggle within this sort of time period that they set this film up to be in. This film takes place around the time when Jesus was apparently roaming around doing miracles and stuff. And I like to call this film the film of the Jesus cameos, because you'll see multiple times where Jesus appears in this film, and you never see his face, which I find interesting and rather subtle about the film, in that it doesn't try to overindulge itself in kind of the Jesus factor. It just kind of says, yeah, I'm showing you this particular character that may have existed throughout this time period, and sort of putting him in there as sort of someone profound within the time period. So I found that kind of funny in the film. Like, whenever Jesus would come up, I just kind of would kind of laugh, because at points it almost felt like it was distracting, because we're supposed to think that this is supposed to be Ben-Hur's story, not necessarily Jesus' story. But again, you kind of do see and understand that during the time period and during the and the setting, having it take place in Judea, for a good portion of the film, you do understand why they would insert Jesus in there. But again, I think that's up for historians to debate. So let me get off the Jesus cameo and basically give you a sense of what the story ultimately is all about. Well, basically, Judah, played again by Charles Heston, is a sort of wealthy Jewish man living in Judea, and I think in particular in Nazareth. And he has a life that is sort of complicated in that the politics surrounding the time mostly had to deal with the fact that the Jews were being suppressed by the Romans, and then you have the Romans who feel like it's their duty to control the entire world, and you really do see this kind of political point being emphasized throughout the film. And it actually takes place as a source for the antagonist, which is a guy named Mesala, and he is played by Stephen Boyd. And basically, his character is sort of a Roman military sort of official, and he and Judah have long had this bond, and you'll see this in the beginning, and you'll kind of see how, you know, he's on the Roman side and Judah is on the Jewish side, so you really do get this tension sort of in the beginning, and how that friendship slowly starts to fall apart. I almost felt like for this film it was very rushed, with building up the friendship and everything in the beginning. It seemed like they switched fairly quickly from being friends to being enemies. unlike maybe something like The Prince of Egypt, where you kind of see a little bit of an involvement there, it does seem like in this film it was rather rushed. But at the same time, the performances as well as the characters, I think, are realistic in that sense of the time period, and that that you would see these things kind of happening because of these kind of political debates onto what's appropriate and what side people are on, and it's clear to see why Messala is on the Roman side and why Judah is on the Jewish side. So you get this tension in the film, and it's really emphasized. This really serves as the main plot point, because you'll see what Messala does that ultimately really affects Judah's life, and you'll see how Judah goes throughout the majority of the film trying to sort of seek that kind of revenge. And again, he does this not just to Judah, but to his family. So you will see that in the film, how ultimately Messala becomes really the antagonist, and how Judah feels that he should avenge his family and himself from what Messala did, and you'll see what ultimately that results in. And it's kind of, I was almost drawing comparisons to Gladiator while I was watching this, because again, you got the whole political debacle sort of going on, and then you also have the fact that Messala is not really, he is attacking Judah, and he is trying to ruin his life, but he's also trying to ruin the people that surround his life and the ones that he cares about and loves, like his family. So really, I was drawing this rather comparison to the struggle in Gladiator, where Russell Crowe's character Maximus is trying to avenge for his family, and you see this clearly in Ben-Hur as well. It's the same kind of shtick, and you see too the political things involved again, but Ben-Hur is dealing with, I think, a lot more different political things during the time, more on a religious level, because again, you have Jesus being a character in here, and you'll see kind of how he sort of plays a role in Judah's kind of life, even though he's very brief, and again, you only get cameos and you don't even see Jesus' face. I think this is the most subtle Jesus performance ever, because you don't really see him. He just comes and goes. I just found that really amusing for some reason. I just think it was just the fact that, Jesus is held as this legendary figure, and it's just kind of he just pops out of nowhere and it's just hey, I'm here now. And so you'll see that in the film. And it doesn't even start off with Ben-Hur. It actually does start off with Jesus being born. And I literally, the first time the first 10 minutes when I was watching, I thought, did I insert the wrong movie? Because they just really built up how Jesus is supposed to play a pivotal role in this whole shtick, and I can kind of understand the sort of political thing going on with the Jews being oppressed by the Romans and how Jesus would play a role in it, but I don't know if showing his birth was maybe necessary. I mean, I guess you could say from a historical level, yeah. But the film is titled Ben-Hur. But again, it does focus in on Ben-Hur a lot more. It does focus in on his relationships. And boy, do we have a big supporting cast here. I'm not going to mention all of the names. I apologize if I don't mention all of them. But these kinds of people, I think, sort of play the pivotal role. There's Miriam, who's played by Martha Scott, who's Judah's mother. There's Tritza, who is played by Kathy O'Donnell, and that's Judah's sister. You'll see Simonides, played by Sam Joffe, and he's basically a royal. He was. The odd thing is that even though Judah is a Jew. I guess he had slaves too for some reason. But I guess they weren't really treated like slaves. They were like more treated like family, I guess. I don't know. You could probably associate it with how we see in history. Sometimes you'll see this in some films where the African American slaves don't really feel like slaves because their owners, I guess, treated them well, and I don't know, maybe they did pay them a little or didn't, really abuse them or tell them that they couldn't leave, maybe. But again, there is this kind of emphasis that, yeah, I own slaves too, but I treated them right. So you have this character, and you'll really see how he plays a role too, and how Judah has this really strong attachment to him. You'll also see Esther, who's played by Hala Harrit, who's the slave owner's daughter, and you'll kind of see what happens with him or happens with her and Judah. And then you get Quintus Arias, who's played by Jack Hawkins, and basically he's another pivotal character that you'll sort of see in towards the kind of mid-beginning, where you see how Judah's life is completely transformed around because of Messala's kind of evil wrongdoing. I guess I'm trying not to compare this to Gladiator. I almost feel like this film does some things that are, I think, better than Gladiator, but then there might be some other aspects of Gladiator that I maybe find more interesting. As far as, I guess, the characters go, they're good. They serve their purpose, sort of. I guess you could say that since this is a really long movie and it goes on for a very long time, that it might be hard for people to really get engaged in it. But for the most part, I don't think I found myself to be bored by it. I think there are some points where it does feel like it might drag a little, but I always felt like that there was something going on. So it really does have that, I think, entertainment factor that I think a lot of people like to associate with, in particular, since it is such an old film, and usually these old films just kind of slowly move and just kind of go at that snail pace, and it just, I could just picture a snail just like holding a sign saying, "This is an old movie," as you're watching this movie, because again, it has that very traditional style. You'll see how there's like an overture, and literally the overture plays for like I almost want to say like 7 or 6 minutes. It just goes on, so I just fast forward it because there's just no point in me looking at overture for 6 minutes and just having music playing in the background. So I was kind of like, no. There's also another interesting thing in this film, in that the religious aspects are really emphasized. I don't want to say that they're preachy. I don't think they're really preachy. They're not. I think, they're not. It's not something like Passion of the Christ, where it's like overly bloody and it's trying to get its religious, stamp in that very kind of forceful way. I feel like in Ben-Hur it's a lot more subtle. And again, I think they emphasize this with not even showing Jesus' face, like just showing him as kind of like this man. And I think you can interpret that various ways. I mean, if you're not really a religious person, you could say, oh, it could have been like any other, guy, and it wouldn't have made a difference. But again, I think there is this emphasis too kind of on miracles. You'll sort of see this at the end of the film. It's kind of, the interesting thing too is that this film has kind of like these two plots kind of going on, and one kind of results from the other, and you'll understand what I'm talking about once you see the film. But ultimately, I think overall it's well done. I really like Charles Heston's acting. I guess I could say Judah didn't really strike me as like a profound character. In fact, none of the characters really struck me as profound, but I think the way that they act them out makes them enjoyable to watch. I like how when Charles Heston he's on the ship, and you can just tell, like, with the anger on his face, like how mad he is. And you know, he can give off, I think, good emotional emotional responses to situations. And I kind of like too when he's asking the guy, like, why didn't you do this or whatever, and and you'll understand this if you decide to watch the film, and he has this sort of presence, I think, on camera, and I think that goes off really well. And he does come off, I think, as kind of like that badass character. He has that quality to him, and he kind of knows what to do. He knows how to act. Let's just say that. I think it's just the way the characters are written that they're not really all that, I guess, maybe profound or interesting. But I think it's just, I guess, the way the film executes itself. It just does a really good job that you can kind of forgive the characters being maybe a little bit bland. They're not overly bland, but I don't think I find them all that interesting characters. And the thing is that some of the characters that are supposed to be very profound to sort of the story are kind of cut off screen until a while. And then we don't see them until a little bit later on, and you'll understand what I mean when you choose to watch the film. And I think I can sort of forgive the film for having these kinds of moments where you feel like, yeah, these characters, they're just really, yeah, just, you know, like Messala, I didn't really find as so overly menacing, or I really didn't get a sense of his motivation. All I understood was, okay, he likes Rome, so he's going to stand for what Rome is, and that's it. Whereas I feel with something like Gladiator, with Joaquin Phoenix's character, you felt like that there was a lot more dimension to it, besides him rooting, yeah, Romans, go Romans, you know. There was other things going on. So, and it seems like Messala's was just political, and to me that doesn't make a profound villain, and that doesn't make an interesting antagonist to go against. Yes, it's sad that they're friends, but they turn on each other so quickly in the beginning, and when they turned on each other so quickly in the beginning, it really just threw me off. I really didn't feel like that they really had a relationship and that they really did bond. We only just get that sense from their childhood, and then heck, you know, when times are changing, I'm not compromising on anything, you know. That's kind of how they approached it, and I felt like, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to feel like they had a friendship at all, really, huh? You know, it's kind of, yeah, I just feel like that the characters aren't really so fleshed out. Judah's pretty fleshed out, but it's not to the point where I find his character to be all that compelling or interesting. And I think that goes for pretty much all the characters in this movie. Except there's this one character, oh, and I forget his name. I think I forgot to write him down, but he's not really so much in it. But he did remind me of sort of the character from Gladiator, who's you know, trying to get some money out of the races, and again, or games, because in Ben-Hur we have the circus, I think it was called Circus Maximus, but it was basically during Roman times when they had this really big racing track, and it would actually be drawn by like 4 horses, which is insane. And and then they'd have a carriage where somebody would sit in, and it was very dangerous because, again, these carriages weren't really all that stable for sure. And there were actually people who cheated, and you'll see how Messala tries to kind of cheat his way through the races if you choose to watch this film. I don't know if they count it as cheating, but to me that counts as really cheating. Like, I mean, that's just not right. But again, there were probably no rules back then. I'm not sure. Whatever could give the most entertainment for people, I guess. But I think that's really what I want to comment on too with this film, and why I think that a lot of people like to put it on this pedestal is that the way that it handles the visual aspects, from the costume designs and the scope and the rooms, and it really doesn't feel cheap. It does feel real. And the interesting thing is that it comes off a lot real when things are real. Like the horses, they could have just, nowadays people can just make CGI horses and we don't need to worry what happens. But in this movie, everything is real. The horses are real. You know, even the horses have their own kind of little moments in the film, and you feel like that they just told Charles Heston to go up and talk to the horses, and you know, whatever happens, just kind of play along with it, because you know how horses maybe are kind of unpredictable. And you'll see at one point where one of the horses like biting his cloth that he has on around his neck, and he's kind of like, hey, you know, and no, don't do that. And you know, it's just like these little subtle moments of realism that I find to be what make the film interesting and what make it feel like you're not watching a movie. And that's what I think what makes it really striking. What's another thing that I can mention? But the whole chariot racing scene, I was just blown away by how real it looks, and how when you see people who get hit off their carriages and onto the track, and when they actually get run over, it's almost like there's actually somebody who got ran over, because I'm actually not sure. I almost want to say I heard that there were actual injuries from making this film with this particular thing. I think at points the film has like this screening effect where they just maybe shot some things beforehand, like the background maybe are some screens, but for the most part everything they tried to pull off was real, and they weren't trying to sugarcoat anything. Just maybe do certain things where maybe it would have been safer to do. But really, the whole racing scene, it goes on, but it has tension. It has this sense of kind of realism too, because I don't even think there's a lot of music kind of playing while the racing occurs. I almost want to say I swear I couldn't hear any music, and I found that to be rather interesting, because I think a lot of films, especially today, like to use for their climaxes or for their kind of turning points this really epic music. But I kind of like how this one didn't rely on that so much, at least from what I could remember, and instead focused in on just the visual aspect of it, of just showing us the races and showing Ben-Hur sort of go through this, and the race sequences are just really well done for its time period. And I mean that by for its time period. Obviously today with this probably wouldn't happen like this, but for what it is, I think it's just really well executed, and I liked that aspect a lot in the film. Is it a perfect film? No. Not necessarily. But what it says, I think, is very human and very engaging for an audience. Sure, maybe the religious undertones to it may bother some people, and again, they do have these moments where there's these kind of references to Jesus and all that stuff, and I can understand why some people may not appreciate that. But I feel, despite those kinds of those undertones, it didn't feel like so out there or so forceful. They sort of felt like that they were coming genuinely from the characters, and that during this time period, this kind of stuff probably would be circumstantial for people during the time. So for me, it works for in the context of this film. I mean, I understand, especially if they're taking place while Jesus lives, you might as well give him a cameo or something. But really, I think that's ultimately all I can say about it. It's a good story. It's got a lot going on. The only thing that I guess I didn't really get so much out of it is, I guess, the characters, because I didn't really feel like they weren't really developed all that much, and when they came on the screen, it felt like that they were sort of bland and just kind of served their purpose, and then Judah would move on, and even though there was, again, a little bit of closure, it's sort of very subtle, and it's not overly, I guess, out there with its characters, especially you'll see this in the beginning with Messala and Judah's sort of relationship. It seems like this movie didn't really want to focus in so much on characters as just make a big story. And that's what Ben-Hur does, and that's what Ben-Hur offers, is a story. And the story, for the most part, works, and I think the way it's handled works. I guess it's just the characters may not be as engaging for me. But overall, the acting is good. The performances leave, I guess, an impression on you. At least they did for me. I guess it's just the way the characters were written, I didn't think were all that interesting. But for the most part, I do consider it a classic, because, again, a lot of people seem to praise it, and after watching this film, I can understand why, and that's why I would put it in this classic category. But I'm more than happy to hear what anybody has to say. Any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody.